Hello, in this video I'm going to do some examples of how to use truth tables to determine whether or not arguments are valid. And just to remind you of our method, we work with OK rows and bad rows. So an OK row has either a true conclusion or at least one false premise. A bad row, all the premises are true and the conclusion is false. And how do we use this? So we just pick a row, any row, and if we discover that the row is bad, the argument is valid and we're done. If the row is okay, we go to the next row, and if all the rows are okay, the argument is valid. And we know that a row is okay once we find at least one false premise or a true conclusion. We don't need to do all of the sentences in the argument for that row. So let's take a look at some examples. So here we have an argument, and so here are the p, y, and r. Those are all of the different possible situations, possible different ways of assigning truth values to p, y, and r. And then we have the premise 1, premise true, and the conclusion. And then we have our row of checkboxes for saying that arguments are valid or invalid. Now in this case, the conclusion is y, and so the conclusion's truth values are already filled out. Now let's look at here, this row. Well, here we know that the conclusion is true. We don't know whether or not the premises are true or false, but we don't care because we know that this row is now an okay row because it has a true conclusion, and so it's not a bad row. To be a bad row, it would have to have a false conclusion. It doesn't, so it's okay. Same for this row. Now when we get to this row, the conclusion is false. That means our situation could be one of three things. Either it's bad, okay, or we don't know. And right now we don't know. It might be bad if both of these are true. If both of these are true, then it's bad. But if at least one of them is false, then it's okay. So right now we don't know. So let's look at if r then p. So let's see if r then p is true or false. Well, we have r is true and p is true. So we have if true, then true, and so this is true. Okay, so this premise is true. So do we know whether or not this is a bad row or an okay row? We don't. If this also turns out to be true, then this will be a bad row because both premises will be true and the conclusion will be false. But if it comes out false, then this will be an okay row because it has at least one true premise. So let's, one false premise. So let's see. So P is true, so negation of P is false. Okay, so now we have negation P is false and Y is false. So we have false or false. False or false is true. So now we have false and true. False and true, that's false. So now we have all the information we could possibly want about this row. False premise, true premise, conclusion. So is this an okay row or a bad row? It's an okay row because it has a false premise. So we don't yet know whether or not the argument is invalid. We need to keep going. So let's look at this one. Let's go to the next row and see if it's bad or okay. Well, we have if false, then true. If false, then true is true. So we don't yet know whether or not this is an okay row or a bad row. If this comes out false, it's a bad row. If it comes out true, then it's an okay row. So let's take a look. Okay, so we have P is true, so negation P is false. So we have false or false, so this whole thing is false. So now we have false and false. This is definitely false. Okay, well, so that means that, again, this is an okay row because we have a false premise. This row is okay because it has a true conclusion. This row is okay because it has a true conclusion. This row has a false conclusion. So as far as we know, it could be true, it could be bad, or it could be okay. We don't yet know. We need to find out about the premises. Let's look at premise 2. So it's an if, and it's true, false. So if true, then false. If true, then false is false. Oh, well, that means this is an okay row because we now know that not all the premises are true. We're done with this row. We don't have to find out whether or not this is true or false. It's not going to make a difference. Don't care. Just don't care. Because it doesn't make a difference to whether or not this is a bad row or an okay row. It's an okay row because it has a false premise. That's it. We know what we need to know, and so we will now move on to the next row. This has a false conclusion, so we don't yet know whether or not it's bad or okay. If all the premises are true, it's bad. If at least one of the premises is true, it's okay, and we don't know either of the premises' truth values yet, so we don't know whether or not it's bad or okay. So if false, then false, that's true. Okay, so this premise is true, so this could still be a bad row. If this is true, then it's a bad row. So, false, negation of false is true, true or false is true, true and false is false. Okay, so is this row bad or okay? It's okay because it has a false premise. So this row is okay, 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 and that row is okay, and so this argument is valid. Hooray.